Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to Resi Live. It is Tuesday.
Yes, it is.
Another Tuesday.
Another Tuesday.
I'm here with Daniel Larson.
Hey, what's up, friends?
And we have a very special guest today, Mr. Jim Tomberlin, the Multisite Guy. I believe that's actually your Twitter handle, right? The Multisite Guy on Twitter?
Yes, it is.
That's awesome. So, Jim is the Multisite Guy. I'll let you introduce yourself and give the best introduction, but I know you serve with the Unstuck group, also with Christ Fellowship. Jim, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, it's great to be with you, Nate and Daniel. A little bit about me. I started this year my 5th decade of pastoral church ministry. I've been consulting churches for the last couple of decades. I've served several churches in my now 40 plus years of church ministry. I was an early pioneer of the multi-site church model at my church in Colorado Springs back in the 1990s. Got me invited to come to Willow Creek to develop their model, their multi-site model. And then 2005, I created a company called Multisite Solutions to serve the church at large, as so many churches were calling to say, hey, how do you do this multi-site thing?
Yeah.
And so what I thought would last 4 or 5 years has been 15 years later, still doing that. But in 2019, I merged my company with Tony Morgan and the Unstuck Group, which helps churches multi-site as well. Is one of the ways to get unstuck is to multi-site. And so but for the last 5 years, I've been serving as the chief of staff at Christ Fellowship in Miami.
That's awesome. And obviously, so we wanted to bring you on today, Jim, just because obviously with the history of kind of multi-site church and as churches have pioneered multi-site and kind of strategized on how to do multi-site, there was a lot of discussion, obviously, several years ago when that was first becoming a big thing. And now with COVID, there was a kind of a change in scope, and now I think a lot of churches are thinking, hey, what's going on next? And so really looking forward to talking with you today just about what you see specifically with multi-site church as kind of where that's headed and what's going on right now, and then just in the church in general, what's next and what should churches be focusing on.
Yeah, but before you jump into that, before you do, I'd be interested to also hear kind of where you saw the promise of multi-site heading and how that's differed to where it is now. So maybe take us in the Wayback Machine or the not so Wayback Machine,
Yeah.
And then kind of tell us about where you see it headed.
Well, in a lot of ways, it is a way back. We're actually in the 4th decade of the multi-site church movement. But the first wave, I like to talk about, there's been 5 waves of this movement. The first wave really began as a Band-Aid strategy for churches like mine in Colorado back in the 90s, who found themselves out of room and out of space because of zoning restrictions, or they fully expanded as far as we could on that location with multiple services. And so what do you do when you're a growing church and in a great location and you've done everything you can in that location? And so me and a few other early pioneers began to play with this new technology, video technology, in the 1990s. Perhaps that's a way that we could be one church in 2 locations. And so it started out as a Band-Aid strategy for mega churches who found themselves out of room and out of space, but it very quickly evolved into a growth strategy for healthy churches of all sizes. We know the average size of a church that goes multi-site is around 1,000 in attendance. Not a small church, but not a mega church either. Third phase of this movement became a revitalization strategy for a lot of stable but stuck churches. When I came to Willow Creek in the year 2000, it was a stable but stuck church. It hadn't grown in 5 years. It was the largest church in America at the time, with a great strategy and process, but they hadn't been growing. They found themselves stuck, and so they wanted to experiment with the idea of maybe these regional campuses as a way to accommodate the growth that to accelerate growth in their own situation and to leverage the strengths and of their own base to extend themselves out across Chicagoland. So it became a revitalization strategy for a lot of stable but stuck churches. But then another 4th wave it became a rebirthing strategy for churches that are struggling, that are in decline, that that need a rebirth. And so many churches have found a new chapter, new life, declining, struggling churches by joining with the multi-site church through a merger. We know today that 4 out of 10 multi-site campuses come by way of a church merger. And so, and just before the COVID came on the scene, we were seeing that multi-site movement was evolving towards becoming a church, movement-making movement. What I mean by that is that they were beginning to see some multi-site churches that were reproducing campuses in the first generation to the second generation and to the third generation, where the campuses were giving birth to campuses. And that's when things when true multiplication happens. And so we were beginning to see that before COVID. And through COVID, we realized that distance, geography really doesn't have to limit the multiplication, multi-siting churches. And so in my church I serve in Miami, we have 7 local campuses, but we have 12 global campuses.
That's awesome. When multi-site first started kind of becoming an idea, what was kind of the promise of it that you saw early on? Was there a moment when you were like, hey, this could work? I'm sure you were faced with a lot of hesitancy of people early on too, saying, what are we doing here? Why should we be multiplying as a church? And how does this work if we're watching a pastor over video or whatever? But what did that look like, and what promise did you see with it?
The aha moment for me, Nate, was when we were asked by Willow Creek Church in Colorado, would you be willing to be an experimental host site for the Global Leadership Summit? You're familiar with the GLS,
Mm-hmm,
I'm sure.
mm-hmm.
I know you all provide the video delivery systems for the GLS. But that was back in 1996, I believe it was. And we said, sure, we'd be glad to host a live broadcast from Chicago to Colorado. And now today that doesn't sound like a radical idea, but in the mid-90s, that was a radical idea.
Yeah.
That a church would deliver over 3 days, a seminar, a conference by way of videocast. And so I'm sitting in my auditorium, fairly new auditorium of 1,200 seats that we had just built in Colorado. And I'm watching the screen live from Chicago, and I'm watching the people in the rooms, several hundred local pastors in Colorado, and looking at them, looking at the screen, I'm thinking, this is working. This is working. Mm. And then I had this flash of an idea. I wonder if this could work every week for us as a church, as a way to solve our space limitation.
Wow.
And so I went to my board and said, a week or two after that conference, and said, hey, I think I have a solution to our space problem.
Yeah.
We could use the video technology like we saw at the summit and have one church in 2 locations using video delivery. And they replied the way all people do, church people did the first time they heard this concept. Jim, what have you been smoking? This is Colorado,
Right.
And, who would go to a church and watch a video screen? Great question to ask in the 1990s.
Yep.
Well, fast forward to today, and if there's any question that people would engage a video screen, that was put to rest through COVID, because every church in America became a multi-site church.
Right.
In that time, from having their home site and then a site online.
Yeah.
I should say 99% of the churches.
Sure. Well, actually, that brings up an interesting point. I love how you kind of grouped in online, or your online campus, as part of that multi-site model. Mm-hmm. Talk to us about that logic and how churches can apply that thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, so many things that we saw through COVID only accelerated what was already beginning to happen among forward-thinking, effective multi-site churches. But even before COVID, I was advocating that the next neighborhood, the next wave of the multi-site movement is going to be in the internet. It's going to be in the digital neighborhood, and so that this is going to be was going to become the front door to the church, and that there's unlimited potential of people on the internet that a church can reach by use of digital technology. And so, yeah, to me, it's just another iteration of taking church to the people. That's the byline of my company, taking church to the people. And there's thousands, millions of people online. Mm-hmm. And so there were churches that were beginning to do that before COVID. My church in Miami was doing that. And but the effective churches of the future are going to really see that this is not just a side show or a substitute for real church in a building, but is a viable way of reaching people and discipling people.
Yeah. So when you talk about multi-site and multi-site strategy, obviously that was one thing back in the 90s and the early 2000s when we were kind of, thinking of what that could be. But how does that change when it comes to a digital context? And when you talk about your digital door, and does the way that you think about strategy for multi-site, does that change when you're thinking specifically towards an online audience?
Oh, absolutely, Nate. I think in the past, before online became a dominant and prominent tool, there was a sense of this we could do online if as a substitute for church attendance for someone who's traveling or on the road or sick.
Mm-hmm.
It was more of a side show for the church. Even when I was at Willow Creek in the early 2000s, and I was advocating that let's put our services online live. Again, that wasn't, it doesn't seem like a radical thing today, but back then it was, because the pushback from my senior team to me was, Jim, if we did that, put our church online live, nobody would come to the church building. Nobody would come to church. They'd have it online. And I said, no, just the opposite will happen. More people will come to church because they'll find us online. And so then there was a idea, well, let's make it available, but password protected to only our church members. And that lasted for about a month.
Right.
Can you imagine this? And then finally we said, let's just do an experiment and do our next series fully online, available, and see what happens. Well, we did that, and we were blown away by, I forget what the big audacious number was, like 1 million people viewing or something. I forget back in the, but it was huge. And then that was the big aha, like, wow, this is a huge opportunity. Mm-hmm. And but in the past, before COVID, it was more like, how do we take our physical experience and make it digital? And so a lot of times it was more about watching, a speaker speak, watching a church service being held, almost like watching a TV church service on TV. And it was more just extending what's happening in the room to online. But the new thinking today now is that realize these are two different mediums. Both are viable and valid. The on-site experience, but let's create an online experience that can be reproducible in the physical space.
Yeah.
And that reaches it. So
that's a really
those are some of the changes that I'm seeing. That's
a really interesting flip, and it was something that we've talked about before too. About in the past, the way of thinking was let's reframe our physical service in a way that will translate somewhat online. And now, we're realizing that, hey, maybe a more effective way of thinking is let's create an online experience that can also be represented well in person.
Mm-hmm. And in some cases, we've talked to churches that are actually creating two separate experiences.
Yeah.
One completely tailored for the online audience that is going to speak directly to them. And then, what happens in the room for those people that are there.
Right.
And, so another way to look at it in terms of, looking at who your audience is and prioritizing both, mediums in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is pretty cool.
Jim, I want to
actually, we call it the hybrid.
Sorry, go ahead. No, I'm going to switch topics. So
I was going to say, we call it the hybrid. That was the hybrid church.
Yeah.
Where it is one or the other. No, it's a both and. On site and online. Right. But they're two different experiences.
That's cool. I want to shift a little bit. I think a lot of people, and one of the big reasons that we have you on today, a lot of people are thinking about, hey, what is next for the multi-site church as we know it? And by that, I mean multiple physical campuses. We've seen, at least from a lot of churches, the reopening for the fall, a lot of reopening of campus reopenings. We've been seeing kind of a renewed interest in launching new campuses, which is excellent. What in your minds has multi-sites, talking about streaming out to physical or just even having physical campuses, no matter what the actual structure or the preaching that's happening at these campuses is, but what's next for multi-site as we know it as a physical multi-campus experience after COVID?
Yeah. Well, I would say again, what we're seeing now post-COVID was already beginning to happen before COVID, and the COVID experience only accelerated what we were already seeing, what we were already advocating, that churches that were effectively multi-siting. And I would say it's in three key areas. First, that small is the new big. We've been saying that for a few years now, that we don't need mega campuses. Small facilities is the new norm now for multi-site. We're talking about a facility maybe somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 square feet is all that's really needed. But small facilities. Second development is clearly the online church experience. That's here to stay now and has been, established. And then thirdly, church mergers. Before COVID, we were seeing, I published a book with my co-author Warren Burt on church mergers back in 2011. And in 2011, we were seeing about 30% of church campuses, multi-site campuses, coming by way of a merger. Now we're seeing over 40% of multi-site campuses are coming by way of a merger. 25% of the churches of the 320 million churches in America. We're talking about 60,000 churches nationwide are very vulnerable. According to to the Barna Research Group, 1 out of 5 churches probably won't survive the next 18 months. And so there'll be a lot of those. One of the solutions for a lot of those churches is to join with a multi-site church. And so small is the new big, online church mergers. We're going to see more and more of all of that in the next decade.
Wow. So we're talking about church mergers and how this is kind of all playing into the future of what multi-site church looks like, from a physical location standpoint. I know, in fact, you had talked about it when it comes to the Willow Creek experience, even dating back to the 2000s. One of the big fears of multi-site is this whole idea of like attendance, engagement. How do we, balance this idea of spreading our church out while still maintaining the type of engagement and, butts and seats kind of mentality? Can you speak a little bit more to that and how multi-site can accelerate church growth versus, the common, maybe misnomer of, oh man, less people are going to come to our other location because this other location is more convenient?
Well, Nate or Daniel, I would say, first of all, the good news is that we have a huge opportunity right now and a huge mission field in America with probably 90% of Americans are unchurched. And so the concept of what's made multi-site so effective is that when a church launches out, reproduces themselves in another location, typically they're going within a 30-minute drive to a location where they already have a strong base of people who already attend the church. That's what's made multi-site so effective. They're not going to the next town or community. They're already there with a strong presence of people who are making that 15 to 30-minute drive to that church, to the central campus. So when you open up a location there, they're already there. Plus, but now they can be more involved because their drive has gone from 15 minutes or 30 minutes to 10 minutes or 5 minutes. And so you're starting with a strong base of people. And then every community in America has more unchurched people than church people. And so there's a huge opportunity for those churches that are outreach oriented, that are sharing the gospel, loving those communities. This isn't taking people away from the sending church. This is multiplying them. And so, when especially if it's a large sending campus, when you send out a couple of hundred people to another location, you just created a couple of hundred spaces for people who are sitting in the pews in the past, waiting to do something, but there was not an opportunity for them. Now there is. But so that is not changing. And during COVID and since this year, there's been churches around the country who are launching campuses. Life Church just launched a campus in my hometown of Colorado Springs 2 weeks ago. Yeah. They had been building it during COVID, and they had over 2,000 people attending opening weekend.
Wow, that's awesome.
So,
it's really cool. Jim, what advice would you give towards a church who is thinking about either starting multi-site for the first time? Maybe, multi-site was on their strategic roadmap or their priorities for the, next 5 years in 2019, and then COVID happened. And now maybe they're thinking and reevaluating, and they're saying, hey, is it time to continue thinking about this multi-site thing? Is now a good time? Should they wait? What advice would you give to a church that is just now really starting to evaluate multi-site strategy?
I would say absolutely now is a great time. I think this has never been a better opportunity for outreach-oriented churches to seize the opportunity in front of them, where even more so through COVID, is even though people have been stayed away from buildings, and from attendance and all that, there's a pent-up hunger, desire for community. I think churches that know how to provide that experience, who provide an incredible experience when they do gather in person. We call it here in my church in Miami, we call it what's the FOMO moments that we're creating for people that they can't experience online, but they're only going to experience when they're in physical contact, in a facility with a few hundred other people. There's that opportunity. And as I mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of facilities available, small facilities, as churches close, that could be redeemed and recovered for the kingdom and come under the oversight of a strong, growing, effective church. There are a lot of places that would welcome a renter in terms of a church group, a church renting facility. And so, there's a lot of opportunity for those who will see that this is our moment now to move forward on an aggressive strategy. But first thing I would say, first of all, are you doing multiple services? The way to become multi-site is to learn how to reproduce yourself in multiple services, at least 2 on Sunday morning, maybe 1 on Saturday night. In my church in Colorado, before we went multi-site, we were doing 5, 2 on Saturday and 3 on Sunday morning. Then we also had other rooms on our campus that we were using as a video cafe or an experience where they could be in another part of the building, engaging with the service by way of video. And so is to grow your location is as much as you can before you start a second location, to multiply yourself in that location. If you can't do it there, then don't try to do it across town. Learn how to do it first where you're at. Now, I would also say the online church experience now is a way to reach a lot of people first. As you know, today people are going online to check out their shopping, to check out vacations, to look for a spouse, and then they go to a place and buy a car or take a trip. And so there's a huge opportunity now, 7 days a week online, for people to find you and find their way eventually to a place where your church is meeting.
So you said this a little bit ago, and it's stuck with me, is the small is the new big. And I just think that's so fascinating when it comes to this whole idea of, so you have multi-site, but then you almost have this idea of like micro multi-site, where it's like this multi-site model that's taking place from maybe a central broadcast location going out to coffee shops and more spaces where like you don't have to like have another facility for people to come and gather. Have you seen an uptick in this micro multi-site model at all, or kind of where do you see that fitting? Does that count as multi-site?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Many describe that as microsites. And again, we were seeing this before COVID, but then COVID really forced this, caused a lot of churches to say, let's do that. And basically, what's a microsite? It's a people meeting together in a small place like a home or an office or some kind of place like that. They're not having all the full programming of a church with a children's program and student program and all that, but it's people gathered around a teaching, worshiping together, even in the room, or following along with someone on a screen. And we were seeing a lot of that across the country, where groups were meeting in homes and doing church. And so I think this is one of the strategies that multi-site churches will use in the future, when you get beyond the 30-minute hour from your sending campus, where you don't have a strong base of people an hour away. But you know what? You can still start forming small groups, around a video cast of a message, of a worship, And we have our strategy in Miami is to, if we get enough get people in small groups in a village or a community, and if we get several small groups together, now we have a basis of maybe actually having a local campus. And so, but it always starts with small groups.
Sure.
Small groups growing and dividing, reproducing, multiplying, and you get enough small groups, you've got the basis of a church. And so now, again, I think COVID has given churches a lot of permission to experiment and to try new things. And yeah, I think the difference between a microsite and a home group of the past is that in the multi-site context, it's still being supported and guided and delivered by a vibrant church that's using small groups to extend themselves further, faster, cheaper than a full-blown campus. But in time, those small groups or microsites, house groups, could evolve into a local congregation meeting together.
Fascinating.
It's good stuff, man. Jim, thank you so much for taking the time with us today. Is there anything that's on your mind that you would say is like the future of the church, or something that you're excited about, or anything else that we didn't discuss today with you that you're saying, you know what, this is something that I want multi-site churches, but also just the church in general to be able to hear and latch onto for in order to be to grow and get to their full potential in this upcoming time.
Yeah, I thought during the COVID season that the church was being cured of our addiction to building-centric ministry, where everything revolves around meeting in physical buildings. I think for many, they realize that buildings finally are not the end game; they're just a means to the end. We know that a lot of the larger churches with large multi-site campuses, they're maybe getting around the 40 to 50% return of their congregation, from pre-COVID. The smaller churches and smaller campuses of multi-site churches are doing better than that. And so I'm hoping that we can be cured of the fact that the faulty thinking that the best ministry happens on a Sunday morning hour within four walls with a group of people sitting in a worship center listening to a preacher. I'm for that. I believe in that one aspect as an aspect of our discipleship. But I think I'm hoping that we've learned that, buildings are just a means to the end. They don't reach people. People reach people. Buildings don't generate income. We realized very quickly people can give online. Buildings don't generate income. They spend it. But vision and effective ministry generates income. And so I think if we can, my hope for the church in this next decade is to realize buildings, facilities are a means to the end. They can be too big. What we need is just something that's small enough to be healthy, or small enough to gather and grow, but not so big that it becomes top heavy, and but big enough to reproduce itself and multiply. And so I'm hoping that we are going to get back to the fact that we're not, as church leaders, we're not in the church building business. We're in the disciple making business. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's all about making disciples, and you can make disciples online, and so and through that, and you can reach people through these different vehicles, the technology that we have today. But and there'll be another generation of leaders who will rise up, who God is raising up, who will lead the way on using the technology of today, and who will continually keep the focus now on true evangelism and outreach, and be community centric versus building centric. So that's my hope for the church, and we appreciate what you do at Resi in helping bring the message digitally across the country and across the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jim, if somebody wants to know more about multi-site strategy or anything else that you've talked about today, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, reach us at Jim at the unstuckgroup.com. The unstuckgroup.com website. We'll be glad to talk to you about going multi-site or about getting better at multi-site, getting unstuck if you're stuck. And so, but we'd be honored to have a conversation with you.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Well, that will do it for us today. Thank you again, Jim, and thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you next week.
See ya.